We're on to convene this meeting of the House Appropriations General Appropriations Subcommittee, and we have before us a substitute to House Resolution 1474, and I believe we're looking at LC 1498447S. Is that what you have, Representative Booth? All right. Well, if you will go ahead and make your presentation.
Mr. Chairman, first I want to thank you and the committee for being here.
I don't have his mic turned on. Is that right? I apologize, and I apologize to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thought maybe that was intentional. I know a lot of the colleagues up there. I thought maybe they were tired of hearing from me. Mr. Chairman, my hope is that we will take, with the substitute 1474, a comprehensive look. And education comes up a lot, but it's really much deeper and systemic than that. My hope is that we could form a study committee, take a look at what we're doing, and see if there is a better way to prevent unfunded mandates from coming from the state down to the county. And that, of course, would need input from the counties, from the state, and I think it's a much deeper and more involved process than what I had envisioned with the original House Resolution 1474. With that, I'll take any questions that the committee has, but that's the conclusion to my testimony.
Okay. We have questions from subcommittee members. Yes, Chairman Hill.
I certainly appreciate this resolution for the study committee and the concerns that you present, because we have them in our similar concepts in our county and school districts and in cities. But I can also see, on the other hand, that there are times in which the state does, for uniformity's sake, need to impose some regulations, et cetera, throughout the state, and some of them can be ones that really should be funded by the states. Otherwise, nothing would, or by the cities or counties, a lower level of governments, if you will. And without those, sometimes we wouldn't have any uniformity. I mean, you can even get as far as traffic laws and where there should be stop signs. And some of them really should be funded at the local level. And my concern, if we totally eliminate, should it go that far, that we would lose some of that control when necessary. And finding that balance or that line as to when that's necessary to impose quote-unquote unfunded mandates is very difficult, and I don't know if I'm wise enough to get there. But I am concerned if we take all capabilities from the state away, that we could end up with some serious unintended consequences and perhaps even some chaos at times. That's all, Mr. Chairman. Just a comment.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions, comments from the Chairman Smith?
Yes, I know it's in your document. Thank you. Good morning to y'all. That you specifically are dealing with county mandates, and so you do have cities, and you do have your school boards, and so I don't know in your presentation, you mentioned the others, but your language in this bill is specifically counties. And so it will narrow your scope to counties only when you do your study committee. And I just wanted to point that out to you because of the existing language in your resolution.
And I appreciate that, Madam Chairman, and I would certainly be amenable to opening the scope up, because I think you're right, and certainly what Representative Hill suggests as well. The reason I went from the original bill back to the study committee is exactly the reason that Representative Hill states, which is that it's a much wider problem. In some instances, you absolutely do need these mandates, whether they're funded or unfunded, and in other cases, they're not necessary. But I would certainly be amenable to any language in the committee's wisdom to expand the scope of it.
Mr. Chairman, one of the terms I've seen in the past is local governments. I don't know if there's a better way to express that or not, but that tends to take care of whatever is not at the state level.
You want to make that in the form of I really wasn't listening as close as I should have been, but if you had a concern about the terminology you want to change it, I'd certainly entertain a motion to amend it whatever time.
My concern again is that this language is specific to county mandates, and in Representative Levitas' presentation, he mentioned cities and school boards, and so this committee would be bound to study county mandates only based on its language. And so if there's an overall desire to review this impact on local governments, I would change it to local governments. Or the other word is local political subdivisions. So whichever is the correct terminology, I'll defer to.
If you want to think about that, if there are any other questions, I think somebody else may want to speak. And if you want to, like I say, make that in the form of a motion to amend the resolution, that'd certainly be your right to do so.
And I would consider that a friendly amendment, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, well, that's good too. Okay. Do you have anything further right now, Chairman Smith?
My seatmate and I are deciding local political subdivisions is a better expression.
Okay, well, think about that. I think I see Representative Powell here. He may want to speak on this also. So, any other questions right now of Representative Levitas? Okay, seeing none. Go.
Make one observation. Turnabout is fair play. I think we pass the ball forward to the federal government, and if we're going to examine our role to the local government, we need to examine the impact that federal government does to your state governments,
and that's
which starts the ball.
Absolutely, Madam Chairman. And we send a lot more money up to the federal government than they give us back.
Starting with what we get back for our highways.
Okay. Let's see. Looks like, I'm sorry, I can't get that. Looks like Representative Powell, did you want to speak on this?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, and I appreciate y'all giving this bill a hearing, and I think this is probably proper. We had put it, Kevin and I, Representative Levitas and I had discussed this, and we put it in the form of a resolution, and I think that it's very suitable to do it as a study committee. A lot of the problems for some of us who's been here for so many years that we remember very well back in the 80s that one of the terms that was being used by local governments was unfunded, no more unfunded mandates. Because of the pressures that have, and to follow up on what my friend, the chairman of Natural Resources, has said, over the years our government has changed so much, and it's been a trickle-down effect from Washington down to the state. And we would certainly have no problems if they wanted to expand this, even to look at those unfunded mandates that come down from the federal government. But one of the things that we are very obvious to, especially some of us that live in different parts of the state, is that the mandates that have been trickled down to cities, counties, and school boards, and it's, as Representative Hill said, that it's local governments are the right hand of the state, and we're supposed to work. We should be working in unison with those local local governmental subdivisions. But a lot of the things that we're seeing that have that's been passed down, that we need to take a very serious look at those to see if there can't be some sort of knowledge given to a lot of the members. And these are the concerns that we have. School boards have had to absorb. They've had to absorb a tremendous amount of debt and pressure being passed down in the form of the QBE cuts over the years. But that's nothing new, because when QBE was formed during the Harris administration, it was never fully funded at that point, and all under the terms for better education. Cities and counties continue to inherit a lot of these expenses, and I think it'd be very fitting that this legislature should hear from these in an organized manner.
Thank you. Representative Powell, did you take a question? Did you take a question from Chairman Smith?
Certainly.
Chairman Smith?
I do think the language in here somewhere needs to refer to the federal government, because that is truly your trigger point. It starts with highways, it goes to our schools, it goes to everything that we have to deal with. And so rather than just having a one-dimension study, it needs to examine, it might be time for our federal government to hear no more unfunded mandates and start the dialogue that way. So, Mr. Chair of our committee, Mr. Chairman Parsons, I don't know where that language needs to go in, but it also, maybe on line 9.
Yeah, the chair would just recommend, I mean, my recommendation and my comment would be maybe that, since that's such a large issue, and we don't have, the only thing we can do, I mean, there is, if it were the will of the General Assembly to do something about this, then something could be done. The only thing that the General Assembly can do as far as the government, what the federal government's mandates on the state, is to recommend or urge them. I mean, I would think it might be better for a separate, like an urging resolution or something, because that's as far as I believe it would go anyway. So that would be my. But you can do whatever you're free to make any kind of.
My point is this: if we are going to look at our state governments down to our local governments, I think there needs to be a recognition in this study that these mandates do not originate with state government, and I think it would be helpful to identify the language that comes out of the federal government before we start doing mea culpa at the state level down to the local governments. I think that I understand the need to urge Congress not to do that, but if you're going to study this problem from the state perspective, I think the state needs to acknowledge
good point.
The impact that we deal with from the federal level. So there needs to be a way to somewhere in there start talking about the trickle-down effect.
Well stated. If you have an amendment,
Mr. Chairman, if I might make a suggestion, in the title "Creating the House Study Committee on County Mandates," what I would ask the committee to consider would be to change that wording of county mandates to mandates on local governmental subdivisions.
Local political subdivisions.
And then drop down and put a clause in here, as a whereas, and say the study committee shall also study those mandates passed on to the state of Georgia from the federal government.
Right.
And just add that and be inclusive, because as we know, study committees have a broad range of what they can look at, but let them look at that.
Thank you.
Representative Levitas, well, I see you're both co-authors of this. How do you feel about that?
I think that's fine, and I absolutely agree with Madam Chairman on that. And what I was trying to do, though I'm a recovering attorney, I tried to pin this as quickly as I can. And, we could call it Creating the House Committee on State and Political Subdivision Mandates. And, certainly include that language. I think maybe we want to go with political subdivision instead of local political subdivisions. Call it, on line 10, we would say, instead of county governments, we would say on political subdivisions of this state. And I think that would cover everything from that is below the state level. But I think that if we're going to do it systemically, I think Chairman Smith is exactly right. We ought to do it systemically. So that's my goal. I think even if we come up with two separate pieces of legislation, one is urging and one is more substantive within the state of Georgia, I think that's the right direction. And I'd certainly, if the chair will indulge me a minute to try and come up with some language, I'd be happy to do that.
Fine. If be a minute or two here. It looks like we have a question. I'm sorry. Did you have further, Chairman Smith? Chairman Calvin Hill.
I guess my concern is, again, every place that we're using the word government or level of government, I'm not quite sure if a school board is in fact a government agency, and that's why I like political subdivisions. I'm not sure the legal standing of a school board, and we don't have legislative counsel with us, so we don't have anybody to refer to. But if we're talking only about governments, that might leave them out. So, we need to be inclusive at every place throughout this bill of referring to local political subdivisions, and I think that would, in fact, incorporate school boards and even some authorities that may not be governments.
Representative Golick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just for what little it may be worth, I believe, dangerously thinking out loud, that a political subdivision is, for my own purposes, Cobb County, City of Smyrna, City of Marietta, whereas a school board would not be defined as such a thing, a political subdivision, but rather a local governing authority. So the City of Smyrna is a local governing authority. Cobb County is a local governing authority. I believe the Cobb County School Board is a local governing authority, but it is not a political subdivision. He says with hope.
Thank you. That sounds,
I believe that's correct.
Thank you. Okay, we have a couple more comments or questions. 22. Chairman Mills.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If you were to say political subdivisions, including local school boards, I think that would include it all. And then I had a question on line 10, page 1. The language says, there have been instances in which General Assembly has imposed costly mandates on county governments. While I don't necessarily disagree with that, I do sort of question the wisdom of using the word costly. I don't think it would change the study any, but I certainly wouldn't want somebody running a radio ad saying that we all confess to passing on costly mandates. So I personally would feel better about just, if you would be amenable to that. Just, it's not going to change the study, but I don't think we necessarily need costly in there.
I don't think we have any opposition to rephrasing that.
Mr. Chairman, if I could, my understanding this is a subcommittee. If it pleases the chairman and the members of the committee, what I would pledge to do as soon as we adjourn is get in touch with legislative counsel that drafted the substitute, put in the language that's been suggested, and present a clean copy, perhaps as a substitute up to the full committee. But I'm certainly happy to try and work on it here. I just know the members of the committee have other places they need to be, and I want to be respectful of the time of the committee.
Thank you. I appreciate that, but we do want to, whatever language is going to go to the full committee, we want to.
Yes, sir.
We want to take care of it here. Otherwise, they might do away with the subcommittee. So.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman Mills, do you have anything else on that?
No, sir. I'm just still reading over it, but I would like to see that word costly stricken.
I would think maybe we just take out those lines 9 through 11. I don't know that those are necessary at all for the study committee. I mean, that would be my recommendation. Anyway, we have a question, number 26. Okay, Chairman Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, my colleagues over there. I'm running late as usual because of the traffic, but these may have already been answered. I noticed that we don't include the cities, municipalities in this, and I'm just wondering about departments or commissions and that sort of thing under local government, whether or not if we require something, would it trickle down to those sub-departments under county and city government?
And I want to thank the members of this committee for being much more awake on a Monday morning than I am. Your colleagues had pointed out exactly that, and I'm busy trying to draft legislation based on the comments of Representative Hill, Chairman Smith, and Representative Golick. But that's absolutely correct. We want to make sure we capture all of this.
Thank you. I don't see any further questions. Were there some other people wanting to speak on this?
Do you want me to?
Okay, we do have some others. I'm going to turn this mic on over here. That would be this one, is that right? Okay, we're going to we're going to recognize Representative Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a daunting committee full of all chairmen here. So I'm not an author or a co-sponsor of the bill, but I do think this study committee is a good idea, and we need to be cognizant of how we're spending our money as well as how we're impacting the local governments. And this has been an interesting debate and conversation here, and I think you guys are addressing what I had in mind as well. But I just want to let you know that on a bipartisan method, that I think this is a good idea to study this issue, as well as the federal mandates on us and all mandates and all unfunded mandates. So I just wanted to share that with you this morning.
Thank you. Appreciate you coming. Looks like a couple others. If you'll come to the mic over here and identify yourself, tell us who you represent.
Thank you, Chairman Parsons, members of the committee. My name is Clint Mueller. I'm the Legislative Director for the Association of County Commissioners of Georgia. We appreciate y'all considering this legislation today. This study committee is something that obviously we've been very supportive of for some time now. And we're actually handing you a handout. This is a front and back one-page handout just to give you a flavor of all the services that county governments are being asked to provide in this state. And the ones that have asterisks beside them, those are the ones that are required under either constitutional law or state general law. And you can see the citation for the code section that requires them. So as you can see, there's quite a bit of things that your county governments at least are doing as a subdivision of the state of Georgia out there every day, such as when you get your tags and titles for your vehicles, and on and on and on. And we do appreciate you looking at this because a lot of times, a lot of these fees especially aren't covering the cost of providing a lot of these services. And so I think and a lot of these fees are actually set out in state law. So I think that we need to, in addition to looking at the mandates, making sure they're adequately funded. In other words, if there's going to, somebody mentioned the uniformity, making sure that these services are uniform across the state, and we agree there's a lot of need for these services to be uniform in all 159 counties. But at the same time, there needs to be a conscious effort when there's a request or a requirement to provide a service in 159 counties, that there's a way to actually fund it without having to fund it on the backs of the taxpayers, because ultimately that's who's on the hook. If these things aren't adequately funded, it falls back on your taxpayers through your property taxes. That's really the only revenue source that your local governments have, is sort of a release valve or escape valve, if you will, because if they can't fund it in another way, if there's a mandate that comes down on them that they can't fund, then that's how it's going to get funded. But thank you.
Okay, let me ask you one question.
Sure.
Who would bear the financial burden of these if the state had financial responsibility? Wouldn't it still be the taxpayer?
Sure, it would be paid.
The same person, wouldn't it?
Well, it would be paid. It depends on how it's structured. But I think what we're saying is a lot of these services that are being provided, that are I guess mandated to be provided, a lot of them can be provided on a fee-based type of service. So because somebody gets a benefit and should pay the cost of that, and if the cost is not being paid, then all the taxpayers across the entire county, whether they use the service or not, then are picking it up. So I guess that's my point, is to keep that in mind, that yes, you could fund it at the state level through a general tax, which would be the income tax or the sales tax at the state level. But at the local level, our general tax is the property tax. So if we have a situation where there's a mandated service and there's not a specific revenue source to pay for it, then it goes back on the general property tax.
Okay, thank you. I think Chairman Hill has a question, if you don't mind taking it.
Sure.
Yes, and it's a question and a comment itself. As a former mayor and Representative Leviticus, I'm really concerned about this in the study committee. Should this go forward? Local governments, if the funding comes down from a higher authority like the state, sometimes getting that money is much more difficult. And Chairman Parsons is right. This cost is going to be borne by the taxpayers. It doesn't matter which taxing authority is going to get it. There's a cost to it, and the taxpayers are, in fact, going to pay for it because that's where all monies come from. It doesn't come from heaven. So within that, we must be very careful, because sometimes a local authority, if you're getting the money locally, you have control over when you get it, how you get it, and how you spend it. If you're waiting for tax monies to come down from the state, you don't know that they're going to come down equally. They're not going to come down rapidly. Sometimes we've waited up to 6-8 months for monies to come down, going through the county, say on sales tax. Tremendous problem with the cities on getting these monies split out. So we must proceed very, very cautiously, no matter what we do, because, again, the cost is not going to change to the taxpayers. And for us to sit up here and think just because we're moving it from one direction to the other is, again, we're rearranging the chairs on the Titanic. It's not going to happen. And we certainly want to be very careful about what we mandate, but we also want to be very careful about what we change so that there still is local control, because local taxation also equals local financial control, and we must preserve that too for the other levels of government.
And I couldn't agree more, Mr. Chairman. And in fact, what this ultimately, I hope, will be is a study in transparency. Because what we often do, whether it's Congress with us or us with local governments with its citizens, are play shell games. One of the reasons I introduced, along with Representative Powell, and what gave birth really to my desire to study this was H.R. 1170, which was a property tax freeze bill that allows local governments to raise as much money as they want, but they can't do it through backdoor tax increases through the assessment process anymore. And things like, even within the government, we have the Correctional Industries Department, which claims to have $26 million in sale. What it really is, and the Chairman had to suffer through my testimony on this before, is we give money to one state agency and then give it back to another through a mandate. So I just want the citizens of the state of Georgia, as well as those of us in the legislature, to know what it is we're doing and see if there isn't a better approach to it. But I absolutely agree with your comments.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I make one quick comment?
It's brief.
Sure. There's a political reality to all this, too, and I think from a local official standpoint, what they look at when there's a mandate that's not funded that comes down, they really only have two choices. One is to cut some other services in their budget to pay for it, or to try to raise it through additional taxes, and obviously neither one of those are politically popular things to do. So it does put local officials sort of in a bind when they have to face making one of those two choices.
Thank you.
Thanks.
We have one more person. Did you want to speak?
No, I'm fine.
Okay, I think that's all to speak. Anybody else in here want to speak on this? Any other questions, comments from the members of the subcommittee right now? Okay, I tell you what, we'll go ahead and hope everybody has any language they want to propose ready by now. What I'll do is go ahead and entertain a motion on the bill. If there's a motion to do pass, we'll perfect the bill at that time, and then if it passes, we'll have a substitute drawn up with that language is what we'll do, and pass it on to the full committee. So did you have anything else you wanted to add at this time, Edie?
No, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Is there a motion? What does the subcommittee want to do with this? Is there a motion? We have a motion to approve substitute to House Resolution 1474. There is a second. Is there any discussion at this time? Chairman Smith, do you have? Okay.
I think this is the proper time to hear the corrected language to the bill.
Okay.
I don't know how artful it is, and I often rely on Representative Golick's help. So, and I've been very impressed, of course, with the committee this morning. So please feel free to chime in. What I've tried to do is address in this language. I may have missed a spot or two, so please help me if you see a grave error here. What I would like to do is really start on line 1. And what I'd like to do, if it pleases the chair, just because there would be a lot of strikes and inserts, is just read you what I intend to have the language read and then go back and present as a more formal motion for the committee's consideration. It would read, creating the House study on state political subdivision and local governing authority mandates and for other purposes. And the first time where that language comes down again, I believe, is on line 9. And what I would recommend is that we make it read as follows. Whereas neither the federal government nor the Georgia state government has been immune from such tendencies, and there have been instances in which the U.S. Congress and the General Assembly have imposed unfunded mandates on this state, its political subdivisions, and local governing authorities without providing the funds necessary for compliance. And whereas there has never been a legislative study of the issues related to legislative mandates to this state, its political subdivisions, and local governing authorities, and there exists a need for such studies. And then on line 15, it goes back to that same name of the House Study Committee on State Political Subdivision and Local Governing Authority Mandates. Right.
Okay, Janae, did you get that?
I'd be happy to reread any part or parts of that, the chair. And of course, I'll work with
I just want to make sure all the subcommittee members know what they're voting on. That's the only thing I want to make sure of. Let's see. Yeah,
I'm happy to do that if it pleases the chair.
Oh, absolutely. Chairman Smith, I have your light on. Did you want that? Did you? Okay.
No, I had just asked that
I'm
question.
going to turn that off here.
Okay.
And I don't know why I can't get these lights turned. Okay, Chairman Calvin Hill.
In reading that, I just want to make sure that we're not missing some things. On line 3, again, we refer to another level of government. We do that again on line 5. At the end of line 7 going into line 8. And I just want to make sure that we're, it's consistent. Some areas we're talking about government, in some areas you're using the long terminology about local political subdivisions, and I just want to make sure that we don't miss any of those and confuse this, so it looks like we're talking about two different things, just for consistency's sake.
It would seem to me that we're just, here we are just talking about that one level of government and what they're imposing or their relationship with another level of government. I don't think that you need all that.
And I agree with Chairman Parsons, and I would say further that the effect of even a local political subdivision or a local governing authority having an effect on some other entity would make it worth studying. So I think you capture everything, because it's not just each individual level, but the effect that each level has on the level underneath it, and quite frankly on the ultimate, I believe it was you, Chairman Hill, pointed out, on the taxpayers, ultimately.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Chairman Hill. Chairman Mills. Oh, you could? Okay. All right, just make sure everybody's good understands what the language is that we have. Are there any questions on that at this point?
I'll be happy to reread if it pleases the chair.
Yes, if you would, please.
All right, beginning on line 1, creating the House Study Committee on State Political Subdivision and Local Governing Authority Mandates, and you would be striking the word county. Then everything stays the same down to line 9. Line 9 begins, whereas neither the federal government nor the Georgia state government has, and then strike the word not, has been immune from such tendencies, and there have been instances in which the U.S. Congress and the General Assembly, and we may want to consider, now that we're broad in scope, we may want to put Georgia in front of General Assembly, but I guess I ought to go ahead and do that since we're using U.S. Congress. Georgia General Assembly have imposed unfunded mandates, and of course I would strike the word costly that Chairman Mills had some concern with, on this state, its political subdivisions, and local governing authorities, and you'd be striking the words county governments, and then continuing without providing the funds necessary for compliance. On line 12, you would strike the word state, and the entire provision, you would strike the word counties, and the entire 2 lines would read, whereas there has never been a legislative study of the issues related to legislative mandates to this state, its political subdivisions, and local governing authorities, and there exists a need for such study. And the only other change that I had was on line 15, for make it consistent, was to strike the word county and insert state political subdivision and local governing authority. The last one is just the name of the study committee, to make it the House Study Committee on State Political Subdivision and Local Governing Authority Mandates.
Okay. Any further discussion on this? Chairman Mills, you have a
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. I apologize.
That's okay.
On page 1, where lines 12 and 13, where we make the statement that there's never been a legislative study, is that true, or where is that from?
To my knowledge, that language comes from Legislative Council.
I mean,
But
that's a
as far as
pretty
I'm concerned,
bold statement.
Then, as far as I'm concerned, Mr. Chairman, I really don't think that particular language is necessary. We could certainly strike everything up to there exists a needs for such study that, well, we couldn't really do that. We could just say where there exists a need, whereas there exists a need to study the issues related to legislative mandates too. And then, well, let me just, instead of telling you, let me just do it. If you give me just a minute.
I just think we've made our case, and those, there have been different studies in different capacities, but maybe not in a study committee in a formalized way.
And Mr. Chairman, if I may, Chairman Mills, if this see if this language would address your concerns. If we just change it to say, whereas there exists a need to study the issues related to legislative mandates to this state, its political subdivisions, and local governing authorities, and leave the entire sentence at that.
Chairman Mills, what do you think about that?
I mean, that's fine. I think we've already stated that. I mean, I don't.
I think the only thing that you need there, and I would defer to the committee's wisdom, is whether you need to state. We've talked about the problem in the preceding paragraphs, but I think that we need a line there that says there's a problem and there exists a need for a study committee, and that's all that those few lines are trying to address. Which is why in the rest of it calls for the creation of the study committee. But I would certainly defer to the wisdom of the committee on this one.
Chairman Mills, you have some other language you'd like to propose?
Well, I don't. I just kind of question, do you even need those lines 12 and 13? You've already made the case, in my opinion, up earlier in the resolution. But it's not the only issue I was really wanting to deal with was making a bold statement. There's never been, and I was just wondering where that information came from. Because when I say something has never been, I'd like to be able to demonstrate that it's never been.
And I agree, Mr. Chairman. That did come from Legislative Council. I actually asked that same question myself, but of course I don't have a way of knowing going back in history. And I agree with you. It's certainly not necessary to what we're doing. And my suggestion and request would be if we just strike out that language and just talk about there existing a need for the study committee itself and remove the language that was about the existence.
Okay, so is there objection from subcommittee to put a period after compliance and then strike the semicolon, the and then 12 and 13? Is that what you wanted to do, Chairman? Mm-hmm. No objection, right? Okay.
My only request, Mr. Chairman, would be if for some reason Legislative Council says we need the corrected line in there, I just would like to come back to the committee to insert that language.
I understand. Chairman Mills, do you have anything else?
I was just looking at where the committee will conduct their meetings, and I understand they would be able to choose. I don't want to get too pinpointed in this, but I certainly would hope as this move forward that the committee would maybe look at, having one meeting with the county, one meeting with the city, one meeting with a school board.
It's my selfish desire that some esteemed members of this committee might be willing to serve on that committee. It would certainly help. You all have so much experience dealing with these very issues. But as to where the committee meets, that, of course, will be up to the will of the chair.
I'm fine, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. We have a couple more questions. Chairman, I'm not sure who was first, but Chairman Calvin Hill.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And not having the luxury of having the reworded resolution in front of me, I believe we have talked ourselves out of the word unfunded. And I think that's what we're talking about here, because otherwise we'd be studying every law that the state puts out, because that would be a funded or unfunded mandate. And same with Congress. So I would like to make sure, for example, in line number 1, if we scratch the word county and inserted the word unfunded, that would be in the very beginning put what we're talking about, which is unfunded mandates. And then with your other wording on the political subdivisions. And the same down on line 15, rather than having to go into the long wording that we have on the political subdivisions, if just about halfway through the line, if we scratch the word county and inserted the word unfunded mandates, because that's, I believe, what we're really studying is the House Study Committee on Unfunded Mandates. and I don't think we need the rest of the wording with that. I just want to make that very clear because it seems we've strayed away from that direction.
That'd be fine with me. I certainly don't have an objection to that. There was apparently, I thought I had heard some concern over the use of unfunded. I agree with you. I think ultimately it's all about unfunded mandates, and it's certainly going to be a lot easier to have that as an acronym than the one I've come up with.
And I think that'd be a lot easier for everybody
the
to...
fact that it works out as scum for the study committee on unfunded mandates, but maybe there's something to that.
Well,
That's
hopefully we won't do
fine, Mr.
acronyms.
Chairman. I would also consider that a friendly amendment and a beautification one at that.
I want to make sure what Chairman Hill is proposing here. Now, we have not taken, just to make it clear, we haven't taken out any language that said unfunded that I can see. In fact, we added it. On line 10.
On line 10, I replaced.
Okay, we do have unfunded mandates there.
But I mean, I would agree. It actually is probably a lot easier to get your arms around House Study Committee on unfunded mandates. But I would, again, defer to the will of the committee. That's
Which
our
would be
Chairman
line
Hill, if you
15.
would tell us again exactly what.
Okay, particularly line 15.
Okay, just tell us exactly what it is you'd like to.
Scratch the word county and
line?
insert, in the center of line 15, and insert the word unfunded mandates.
and get
Or
rid of,
unfunded.
and get rid of state political subdivision, local governing authority. Just make it this House
Right.
Study Committee on unfunded mandates. Oh, right.
And on line 1 also, which clarifies and puts the same wording in two different places on the bill. Its intention and then also the name of the committee.
I think we could, and if we still leave that language in on line 10, in the descriptive part, it makes it clear what it is we're after.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Okay, 26, I'm not sure. Okay, Chairman Williams.
Chairman.
Chairman Williams, did you have a?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. This is in the form of a study committee, and I'm sure when the study committee is created and we meet, we're going to be talking about probably more things in this bill, and we keep defining it and refining it. It ought to probably be loosely drafted so the study committee can do its job. So I'm at the point that I'd like to see it moved to pass, and let's get out of here.
Well, I agree with that. I don't think anybody would argue with that. Thank you. 24, Chairman Smith.
Yes, thank you. Just want to go back to make sure we have not. I think it's the 7th grade. I hope the 7th grade is watching this today. It's how a bill is made or how a bill becomes a law or whatever. Yeah. We have certainly doctored on this, but my point is this: I don't want us to lose sight that it begins at the federal level. And I'm concerned we might have lost that with all our refining.
The only thing I would add to that is that it seems to me that in new lines 9 through 11, where we've mentioned the federal government, U.S. Congress's role, that it would cover that. And I just want to say, Madam Chairman, I am so glad to know that it is not just the Judicial Non-Civil Committee that works as diligently on legislation as we do. So I appreciate the effort and attention you've given first thing Monday morning to this.
Thank you. I'm going to have ask Janae here. I'm going to turn your mic on. Let's see, to go over this. I want to make sure we have the language that there's no objections to in here. Otherwise, we might have to take a vote.
Okay, creating the House Study Committee on unfunded mandates and for other purposes. We didn't make any changes to 2 through 8. And then at line 9, you want to change to, whereas neither the federal government nor Georgia state government has been immune from such tendencies, and there have been instances in which the U.S. Congress and the Georgia General Assembly have imposed unfunded mandates on this state, its political subdivisions, and local governing authorities without providing the funds necessary for compliance, period. Strike the semicolon and.
Let me just stop you. I just want to put a "the" before the Georgia, so it would be neither the federal government nor the Georgia state government, just for make it balanced.
Okay, so neither. Okay, whereas neither the federal government. Say that again.
I would just say neither the federal government nor the Georgia state government. Just making sure we're parallel on it. Or
do you want state of Georgia, or do you want Georgia state government?
It doesn't matter. I'm just tracking what's in there. We can have the government of the state of Georgia. That's fine. Madam Chairman, do you have a
The federal government, the Georgia state.
The. Thanks. All right, so we took out lines 12 and 13. And then at line 14, now therefore be it resolved by the House of Representatives that there's created the House Study Committee on Unfunded Mandates. And then everything else is completely the same.
That's my understanding.
Okay. Is there any objection to the language that we've just gone over in creating this substitute to this committee substitute to House Resolution 1474? Any further discussion? We have a motion. We have a second. All in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed say no. House or committee substitute to House Resolution 1474 is approved with a due pass recommendation to the full committee.
Thank you for your time, Mr.
Thank you.
Chairman, members of the committee.
Thank you very much for coming.